Tale of Zatoichi. So here we are. And I did confirm this was the first Zatoichi movie, which I did need to confirm. I guess it was based on a book from 1948, sorry, an essay from 1948. But good to know that it is the first one because there are so many of them. It did end up being the most sequelized Chanbara film of all time. I think still has that record. And this is one of the great parts about talking about old movies is I get to watch them and say, hey, this, what do we look, 40, 50, 60-year-old movie? Pretty good. The one that people have been talking about for 60 years? Not bad. It's actually very good. And it reminds me even of, this is going to sound bad, it reminds me of Godzilla in a way. It sounds like the most like reductionist, stereotypical way I can talk about Japanese film. Have you seen the Japanese film? Oh yeah, like Godzilla. But in that, it has a premise, a pretty attractive premise, whether it be monster or blind swordsman, and then is not really about that mostly. And I guess this came from Dai Studios, which I'm probably still saying that wrong, at a time where the Chanbara film was coming back after having been kiboshed a bit after World War II. Japanese, like many other of the occupied countries, had to ease it on the violence a little bit when it comes to cinema and just generally speaking. But they were getting back into it at this point, again, 1962, we're talking about this movie. And I guess we're churning them out, much like the US maybe churned out Westerns kind of at this point. So there's this idea that maybe they didn't know they were making anything entirely special, but it came together in a fantastic way. It just really did. And a lot of people put this on the main guy, the actor, Shintaro Katsu, who did go on to reprise this role. Again, I don't know, I think in most of these sequels, don't quote me on that, I'm sure I'll figure it out eventually. But he is fantastic. He's very, very good. He does a really good job of being kind of this background character who you really get the feeling knows what's going on because he's surrounded by idiots for the most part. There's these two feuding Yakuza clans that are making mistakes and they're filled with people that are, and this is where I say it's not necessarily about the blind swordsman, much like Godzilla isn't necessarily about Godzilla, because the bulk of those movies are taken up with the interpersonal, kind of with the dramatic, maybe even the melodramatic here and there, but it's done, again, really well. And here it's the same thing. There's a bunch of people just making a bunch of mistakes. There's Tate, who's gone and got a girl pregnant, who ends up dead, whether by suicide or his own hand, we don't know exactly. And he's like one of the better maybe characters in the film. Everybody else is a gangster. And Zatoichi himself, who is also this kind of lowly, he's blind, so I guess there's this idea that socially speaking, he's been forced into kind of some of these lower positions like a masseuse. He is also a masseuse or a lapsed masseuse, but he picked up a sword as a way of commanding respect eventually. But he has superhuman senses in a way. We can hear from far away, but it's not just that. He can also understand the failings of all of these characters, including his own, who again, he feels a little bit, much like Westerns, he feels like that hero that can't necessarily integrate into society, much like he might want to, because he belongs to the plains in the Western sense. In the Eastern sense, in this film, he kind of belongs to that life. Anyway, very well done. He is an absolute performer in this. He's really fun to watch. And everybody else really pulls off their interpersonal dynamic, their drama, everything that they're doing there. So yes, very, very good. And this might be incredibly filmy of me, but the cinematography seems next level. If they were churning these out, I'd be really curious to see what this guy also did. This guy, Chikashi Makiura. really not only uses both, I'm speaking literally in the sense that cinematography is using this light and shadows in a way that feels almost impossible with some of the cameras they must have been using. Like there's a very nice Criterion transfer out there, so I don't know how much it's been touched up, but it seems like very little grain, and also by way of texture. Like he uses a lot of light and shadows and whatnot to really imbue texture on not just the people, but the places, and just really good looking stuff. So above and beyond, if they were churning these out, they really nailed it. Everything just really came together for this one in particular. And if I can just double down on the filmy stuff, kind of made me realize how much I miss Japanese cinema. I did dive into Godzilla not too long ago, and that was a blast, but didn't remind me of a lot of what I saw in school when it came to Kurosawa or Ozu especially. And there's a few Ozu moments in this movie, I would say, even just kind of quiet, you know, like the takes are maybe just 5 seconds longer than you think they would be naturally, and you kind of luxuriate in the space. It's really nice. So, nerd moment over. Apologize, but the Tale of Zatoichi is a fantastic film, it turns out. So, for the next one of these, I think I'm going to do a catch-up, especially if I am moving down that list that I mentioned previously. It's on Letterboxd. I'll link it again in this video, in this description, or podcast if this is how you're listening to it as a podcast. But I think I'll do one where I kind of catch up and maybe summarize rather than move on to the next movie, which I think is many, many years down the road, especially if you're going by that list. So come back for that, hopefully next week, if I can keep up with the weekly, and if not, after that. So we will see you next time.